Good afternoon, everyone. Honorable Speaker, Dr. Sivakumar, Dean Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, Somaiya, Vidyavihar University, Mumbai. Shri Pradeep Mehta, Founder, Secretary General, Consumer Unity and Trust Society. Mr. Narang, Head Economics Research Group, ICICI Bank Limited, and Indranil, Co-Chair Economic Policy Research and Development Committee of the Bombay Chamber of Industry and Chief Economist of Yes Bank. Esteemed board members of Bombay Chamber, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's webinar on New Education Policies 2020, Opportunities and Challenges. At the outset, and on behalf of the Chamber, I would like to express my sincere thanks to our speakers for very kindly accepting our invitation for addressing our members on this subject, which is both topical and of very importance. We know that they do not need any introduction and are uniquely qualified to deal with today's subject. Our special thanks to our partners, SPA Capital Services Limited and Aditya Birla Capital for their support to make this happen. I have the proud privilege to mention that Bombay Chamber, established in 1836, has a long and illustrious history of continuing service to trade and industry. In fact, we are the oldest chamber in the country. Over the years, our membership has just grown. At one stage, we had only large corporate, but years back, we decided that the chamber needs to concentrate on MSMEs as well. And today, 70% of our membership is based on smaller, medium and micro companies. So the large companies are mostly Mumbai based, but their area of influence, their business activities are run across the world. So the chamber, as all of you would know, acts as a bridge between civil society, government and its member organization, and aims to promote the interest of all the stakeholders in the overall interest of the country. Some of our past achievements have been that the chamber was instrumental in bringing the railways to India, and also the Kala Ghoda festival, which is for so many years has been one of the trademark events of Mumbai city. The chamber contributes to key national and chamber initiatives such as ease of doing business, digital India, inclusive growth, corporate as a citizen, and many more. I don't want to take too much of time on this. Regarding today's session, as you all know that India has the largest number of higher education institutions. Despite that, we find the number of students interested in pursuing higher studies abroad, as is it on the rise. In order to improve the skills and talent of a large population, there is a need for raising the quality and standards of our education system. Also, the role of institutions become more challenging in the modern world with innovations and technological developments. Investments in education and education institutions should be viewed as an investment for economic prosperity, but education has to be made affordable to all deserving and poor students too. In this backdrop, to get more clarity on the new education policy 2020 with respect to opportunities and challenges and its impact on job and industry, Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry has organized today's session with the highly respected personality as panelists. I'm sure you're all eagerly awaiting to speak to them, so I will hand it over to Professor Sivakumar. Professor Sivakumar, over to you.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Sandeep Khosla, Director General, BCCI. Also, thank you, Dr. Sugita Upadhyay, Deputy Director, BCCI, and my esteemed panelists. I am privileged to get associated in this webinar along with you. I start with a brief introduction about myself. I am given 30 minutes to speak. I have prepared a PPT. It is structured as per the theme. I've been into academics all along. It's about 30 plus years. So I've done my MA, MPhil and PhD from Central University of Hyderabad, which is a Government of India funded university. And for about 20 years, I am associated with Somaiya Institute of Management, which was a permanently affiliated college under the Mumbai University. And past 3 years, we have been a private university. And I am heading a small department of 9 members. We have different programs and various courses of economics and general management I am associated. And after forming the university, I am appointed as the Dean, School of Humanities and Social Sciences. That's a brief about me. So I would be covering about 15, 17 slides, all pertaining to the context of the National Education Policy 2020. Why was it conceived, and what are the nuts and bolts of it, and what is it going to do with the Indian education system in the coming years, as well as in the coming decades. Let me share this PowerPoint. Is this PowerPoint visible?
Yeah, it is. Please go ahead.
Yeah, this is the structure. I'll talk briefly about the context or backdrop, the overview of the National Education Policy 2020, its effects on future education in the Indian context, and summary. Before we start off in the context, we have certain commitments as a country that we had made to the global community. As part of the Sustainable Development Goals, we have committed that we would promote and we will provide all opportunities to every citizen of this country to have equitable and quality education. And as part of that SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 4, India has initiated this national education policy. Unfortunately, the last 2 years have been difficult years for us, so we could not see much of the implementation part as such. And since education being in a joint subject of the both union government as well as state governments, it's a complex field, so to say, as far as our democratic structure is concerned. So the states also have to extend their wholehearted support in order to materialize this national education policy in its spirit. So when we are looking at the backdrop of this national education policy, we are all aware that we live under a very complex world today, which has been aptly described as VUCA, the VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous VUCA world. So in this context, the world has been rapidly changing, and we are not supposed to afford to lag behind the best in the world. So we need to focus more, and that is what has been emphasized in terms of the NEP, wherein it has been said that some of the skills we need to provide to our learners much more than what we did in the past, such as the computer science, the data science, along with the other subjects that we have been learning traditionally. And in this context, let me also, though it's not there on the slide, speak a little bit about the formal education that has been evolved over years. To be precise, nearly 4,100 years now, 4083 years. And in the context of India, we can classify this evolution into three broad parts. One is the Vedic education system, the Islamic education system, and the current English education system. And as a colony of British, the reforms initiated by Lord Macaulay nearly 200 years now, we are in some form or the other continuing the same system of English education that was introduced as a British colony in India. We have made some changes nevertheless, but these changes are much slower. They are not consistent with the changes that have happened elsewhere in the world. And these changes, for a variety of complexities that India has in its education system, approximately I would like to put it as one significant development per generation, or a little longer than that. That's what has been the pace of change in the third format of India's formal education system that we are talking of over the past few centuries. Now, the present system of education the government of India wants to make some fundamental changes whereby the employment landscape and the global ecosystem in the world as well as within the country, it's becoming increasingly critical that our learners, they not only learn what has been taught in the classrooms, but more importantly, they also should understand how to learn appropriately. So learn how to learn is also something which is the responsibility both of the providers, that is the institutions, as well as there is also some responsibility on the part of the learners themselves. It's a joint exercise, so to say. Education thus must move towards less content and more towards learning about how to think critically, solve some of the problems that all of us encounter through our careers as well as in our lives, how to be creative, and how to have some kind of knowledge, not only in a predefined silo such as arts, medicine, commerce, law, so on, but it has to be more broad-based and multidisciplinary. Now, these are not my personal views. These are what the words that you find in the National Education Policy. I've picked a few of the thrust areas. So the focus, therefore, according to NEP, has been more on how to innovate, adapt to changes, as I just mentioned, the VUCA world, absorb new material that keeps coming at very, very rapid pace these days, and we have to remain novel so that we remain current in the changing fields. As well, the pedagogy or the delivery patterns of providing the knowledge in the formal education institutions, they also, according to NEP, must evolve to make education more experiential, holistic, integrated, inquiry-driven, discovery-oriented, learner-centered, discussion-based, flexible, and of course, end of the day, the student should not feel stress or burden. He or she should feel learning as a pleasure, and therefore, learning has to be more joyful. It has to be enjoyed by the learners, and it should not be seen more as some punishment imposed on him or her by either the parents or by the relatives or by the teachers. Now, as far the roadmap is concerned, as I just mentioned, that when we have a formal education in this universe, over 4,000 years, and in Indian context, over 2,000 odd years, we cannot expect certain fundamental changes in the education system overnight. So these changes have to be accepted by the legislative assemblies of 28 states. We know how complex is our system of democracy. We have freedom. So therefore, even today, as we speak, there are some states which are vehemently opposing introducing some of these changes inside their states. And it is open to some discussion, debate. But end of the day, what is expected out of these fundamental changes in the form of NEP 2020 is that the education is expected to build right character, enable learners to be ethical, rational, compassionate, caring, while at the same time prepare them for gainful, fulfilling employment. So we have different objects of education system. The first one being the utilitarian, the second one being pragmatic, the third one being ethical and caring for some kind of human values, as is mentioned in this bullet point number 2. So the NEP is focusing more on such kind of changing the overall personality, the way we think, the way we behave determines the character of an individual. So many a time we are coming across in the current generation of learners, some scary behavioral aspects, in the sense that if they score less in a particular subject, if they can't make it to some of the professional courses by writing a competitive examination, they are so scared that the way they act is absolutely not reflecting of a good character. Now, nothing should lead them to feel that it's the end of the road. There has to be some kind of resilience. They have to have greater determination. If not today, we can always do it the next attempt. That's the kind of internal strength or confidence the education must provide. Now, the gap between the current state of learning outcomes and what is required, it must be bridged through undertaking major reforms that bring the highest quality, equity, and integrity into the system, from early childhood care and education through the higher education, that is the tertiary university education. The aim must be for India to have an education system over the next roughly 20 years from today that is second to none, with equitable access to the highest quality education for all learners, regardless of social or economic background. That's more important. The next slide, I have taken some quote from the World Bank, which says the state of tertiary situation in terms of accessibility of university education. Now, NEP envisages that curriculum and pedagogy of our institutions, they must develop among the students a deep sense of respect towards the fundamental duties and constitutional values of India, bonding with one's own country, and a conscious awareness of one's roles and responsibilities in the changing world, rather than too much of focusing on if I have invested X rupees, what is the ROI, return on investment, that I have. This is, of course, a rational thinking, and it is the crux of utilitarian theories of any activity, including the system of education. There is per se nothing wrong, but only the commercial outlook is not everything that NEP is focusing. It is wanting the individuals to realize and then adhere to their fundamental obligations and constitutional values. The vision of the policy of NEP 2020 is to instill among the leaders a deep-rooted pride in being an Indian, not only in thought, but also in spirit, intellect, and deeds, as well as to develop knowledge, skills, values, and dispositions that support a responsible commitment to human rights, sustainable development and living, and global well-being. And finally, what this would transform a citizen of this country is that he or she will be made to see himself as a global citizen, having some kind of compassion for the human values and issues, not only within the defined territory of India, but even beyond. Now, one point, because I am associated with a B school, and I have seen the students and their parents very closely. I'm interacting with them for over 30 years now. That comes of about 10 years in engineering institutions, as well as in management institutions for the last 20 plus years. The education cost world over is rising, so is in India. So parents find it extremely challenging to support the offspring, either one child or two children or more than that, while imparting quality education within India or outside. They need to invest a lot out of their lifelong earnings or savings, or sometimes they may have to liquidate the assets. So end of the day, they focus more not merely on the learning, and the outcome of learning has to be a gainful employment, so that the investment that they have made in the form of money rather than time should fetch for them the good returns. Now, quickly, I will deal with, of course, this is what the Fiki report of 2014 says, that role of private sector in India. In the K-12 is an acronym, as all of us may be aware, from United States, kindergarten to 12th standard. A lot of school education has been taken care by the private sector in India. Slowly, the government is moving out and focusing its attention on the professional education, the university education, and some other fields. Now, I would provide some snapshot of where we stand in the world today. These are the left-hand side column, United States to the Netherlands. They stand in the same rank in the world today in terms of quality of education system. Whereas the right-hand side column, it talks of some of the nations wherein education system is very, very poor. So where India stands today is we are having a global rank, that is the latest rank available, 32, and we have made some improvement from earlier year's rank of 34. That 2 ranks is some silver lining, but we have a long way to go. And when we say that in the world, we are number 6 in terms of our economic ranking. In educational ranking, 32 rank is not consistent with our economy's ranking. So there has to be a lot of homework that has to be done so that we also catch up even in our ranking in the educational arena. So this is what I was mentioning about the World Bank quote. This is a bit old. This is not this year's, but in India's tertiary system, only 1 out of 10 young people, they have got access to higher education. And this is what the government wants to make some fundamental changes, so that all the interested students, they must have, irrespective of economic or social challenges that they may face. So this is what is some structure. The next slide talks of the old structure, comparing it with the new structure. The existing structure is on the left-hand side. Presently, we follow this. And the right-hand side is the new structure, whereby the greater emphasis that has been there on standard 10 and the +2, it is now equally distributed so that the student doesn't feel highly pressurized. That is the basic object or purpose of making some changes. And also, there are some other advantages with the new system that I will be talking in the coming slides. Now, the first 5 years after some child is sent to the school from the very early age of 3 to 8, these are play schools or preschool, and the standards 1 and 2. That is how the student would spend the first 5 years outside his home. And this stage would focus on teaching play-based or activity-based methods and on development of language skills. Now, here comes the government of India's greater emphasis on the regional language. There has been a misconception, as we just discussed about Macaulay's reforms during the British regime, 1834. We have started somewhere believing in that, rather wrongly, that English speaking would make an individual intellectually superior. The ground reality is not necessarily be. Those who are less versed with English or can't speak English, they have mastered the skills which are very rare skills. So this thinking has to be changed. So the government of India is wanting regional languages to be given emphasis, at least in the formative stages of learning. Let the child decide after he or she reaches a particular age where he can decide about which language to pursue. There are so many foreign languages also. If he is not highly interested with only English, he can pursue any language of his choice. Now, the second phase or second part, 3 years of preparatory stage, that is age from 8 years to 11 years. The focus will remain on a continuation of the language development and the numeracy skills. Here, the method of teaching and learning would be play and activity based, and also to include classroom interactions and element of discovery, rather than simply memorizing what the teacher suggests a student to read from some paragraph to some other paragraph. Memorize that, write in the exam. That has been the practice most of us have been subjected to. So this is what the government wants to make some major change. The 3 years of middle stage, that is ages 11 years to 14 years, from classes of 6 to 8. This stage would focus on experiential learning in the sciences, mathematics, arts, social sciences, and humanities. And the 4 years of secondary stage, that is from age 14 to 18, will cover 2 parts. This will be covered in 2 parts, classes 9th and 10th, and the +2, that is classes 11 and 12. Main change in these classes is to shift to a multidisciplinary system where the students will have access to a variety of subject combinations that they can choose as per their skills, their interest areas, and there is no such thing as we have been studying them, which are now rigid classifications of arts. A student who has taken arts can never learn financial accounting. So is the case with a BCom student. He can never learn, even if he is interested, some chemistry related subject or mathematics. This is ruled out. Now, this kind of rigid classification is going to go as per the NEP 2020. Now, so far, we presumed in India that all those who take birth in this country, contrary to the fact that they all are able to see, listen, think, they have both the limbs, they can walk, and they are all normal human beings. There are special schools nevertheless, but they are very, very limited. And those students who are admitted under the pressure of the government policies in the public schools, the teachers have a huge challenge to impart the same education that others are learning quickly in a few minutes. The other challenged students, they are left behind. Now, if they are taken care, there is a problem with those who can grasp some of these sessions quicker. So now the government is planning to have some kind of specialists for taking care of those, and there will be some exclusive schools to take care of those students. So they won't be lagging behind. So even if they have certain challenges, learning would not be a constraint for them. In terms of versatility, as was mentioned just now, heavy concentration in the +2 and HSC is going to go. There is equal spread. As well, the other advantage with the NEP 2020 is that the present system, if some student drops out in his 3rd year of BSc, or say in the 4th year of engineering, he gets nothing. And a few years later, he or she will be called engineering dropout, or is only a +2. He went to college, but he could not complete his graduation. So present proposed system is going to consider and award a certificate or a diploma for the time that he has spent in first 2 years of graduation, or if he drops out even after the first year of graduation, the time and effort and energy spent will not go waste. Same is the case with 2-3 years of engineering. That's one great advantage. Now, introduction of technology, both from admissions to instructions to grading to digital certificates and beyond, there is going to be technology. Global exposure, we are initiating the process of inviting top 100 international universities to have their branches in India, so that our country is not taken commercially by the rest of the world. Now, higher education institutions to become multidisciplinary by 2040, wherein they will be allowing students to opt any stream as per their capabilities and interests, so that some college cannot say that we provide only engineering education, and if somebody wants to study arts or commerce or management, they need to join some other college. This is going to go, and each college will be equipped over the next 15-20 years with the bouquet of all various branches of knowledge. Now, there are major roadblocks so far in Indian education system which prevented all this from happening. In case of public institutions, once a teacher or a professor is recognized and is regularized, then he would continue till he retires. That's one problem. So there will be some members who lose interest beyond a few years, and they'll be acting as a burden. Whereas in case of some of the private institutions, there is overexploitation of the teachers on one hand. On the other, the students and their parents, they are levied very high tuition fee. And because of scarcity of good education institutions in many of these metros, mini metros, the parents, they end up spending a lot on providing the basic education to the students. Infrequent revisions, because there is a huge commercial market, question paper patterns and guides, anticipated questions. Now that lobby will not allow the university administration. They have lobby up to the university senates not to form any regular board of studies and to revisit on changing the existing curriculum. So the curricula will be continued sometimes over decades. So even once in a decade is considered to be a frequent revision of syllabus, which is obsolete as per today's standards. Now, government is also started quickly exiting from the education field and providing a very generous autonomy status to most institutions. And some of the institutions may not deserve this autonomy, but that is what is a trend. That is also a dangerous move. Dilution of the standards and poor internal monitoring process of some of the education institutions. They are simply more oriented about admitting the new batch the moment one academic year is complete, rather than whether or not internal monitoring policies are in place. They need any change. They don't generally revisit. We in India, unlike some of the best universities in the world, such as the Oxford, the Harvard, Cambridge, some of the best universities in Hong Kong, which are truly internationalized with 134 country representation, 141 country representation. Students currently enrolled in a particular year, they measure and display on their official website the economic impact caused by their institution in that year, in that academic year. Now, I don't come across any institution in India which has any such a display of amount, rupees so many hundreds of thousands of crores is the economic impact of their university or education institution in a particular academic year. So that has to change. the orientation or outlook has to change. It is not simply a compliance exercise. We also have to inculcate some sense of pride in the minds of all stakeholders, particularly the students as well as the employees or the teachers associated. It is not merely a compliance exercise, imparting education, providing some certificates. Now, education
Professor, just sorry to interrupt you, but you'd probably have to wind up within a minute or two.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
So the focus would be on to improving the health and livelihoods, contribution to the social stability. It has to drive the long-term economic growth. Thereby, we need to aim at transforming India. Economically, we have adequately transformed since 1991 reforms, and long journey has been successfully and enviably covered by us. And I think it is time for us to catch up even in the educational field. So with this, I would stop sharing the screen. Thank you all.
Thank you, Professor, for your kind address. I would now request Dr. Pradeep Mehta to address the audience. The floor
Thank you very much,
yours.
Mr. Moderator and my fellow panelists. That was quite a tour de force, I would say, Professor Sivakumar, of the whole new education policy. See, there are 3 problems, I would say 6 problems with the new education policy or education system as it is. The first 3 problems are implementation, implementation, and implementation. And the second set of 3 problems are faculty, faculty, and faculty. I mean, if you see the kind of situation that we have throughout our country, all these policies are designed and spent out and so on. In any event, my talk is more about medical education in particular. The new education policy doesn't address medical education explicitly or in depth. It does refer to it. That is important, and it becomes more important considering 2 recent events, 2 recent, I would say, major earth-shaking events. One was the pandemic, the healthcare system, how it was able to cope with it. Fortunately, we were even better off compared to countries in the West. That's something which deserves kudos. The second thing, the second major issue came out of the Ukraine-Russia war. The plight of nearly 20,000 or 90% of which were medical students coming from Ukraine. It's only exposed the underbelly of our medical education system in India. Now, therefore, we need to focus, and somebody in the audience also spoke about the fact that they would like some very specific issues to be referred, and therefore my talk I thought would be more on the specific issue of medical education, because it is a very serious issue in terms of the availability of doctors and so on, and subsequently the issue about medical education itself. We require big reforms in the area of medical education. The Prime Minister has just spoken about the fact is that more private enterprise should enter this field. Fair enough. There are a lot of private enterprises already in the field of medical education, and they're using it as a mercantile operation rather than as an educational operation. And the kind of ridiculous fees that they're asking for private medical institutions. The same thing happened also in the past in the public sector as well. If you remember the chairman of the Medical Council of India was involved in it in a big way, shady way, I would say, and the whole thing came to a standstill. The kind of fees which were being levied by this. So what the new policy on medical education, at least which has come out from the setting establishment of the National Medical Commission is something very important for us to note. They have kept a price cap in private medical institutions of up to 50% of their students, not 100%. So they have 50%, and kind of again an affirmative action program that you allow students to come in and pay lesser fees, at least half of them, and half of them to pay the kind of full. Now, what if you examine the history of Ukraine kind of thing, it is not something new in that sense. That we did see that a large number of our students could not get into Indian medical institutions for several reasons, as I had already explained, and it's not unknown to many of us. But the fact is that the entrance exam, the fees, the availability of seats, etc., was something which they could need not have encouraged for going abroad to Ukraine or Russia or China or many of these other countries which have a large number of medical education institutions or at least seats available. Now, how do we deal with that kind of situation is something which we need to talk about. I mean, we even having new medical colleges alone may not solve the issue. As I pointed out, the problem that we have in terms of faculty. Where do we, how do we attract more people to come and teach? This is again, as I said, three problems of faculty, and the same applies to medical education as well. The new medical colleges that I know of are struggling to getting sufficient and accomplished faculty. So they often take up retired doctors from the government medical services or retired medical teachers and employ them in their own organization to be able to do it. I don't see any harm in that at all. But we still need to address the root of this problem as to how do we find it more attractive. Now, the National Medical Commission Act, which is what we introduced to provide a education system, among other things, to improve access to quality and affordable medical education. And secondly, to ensure availability of adequate and high quality medical professionals all over the country. So the idea is this is very holy, is very forward looking, but again, as I said, the three set of problems, one set of three problems, the implementation issues would always crop up. Now, the kind of regulation which exists under the thing, which is, of course, a lot of it is grandfathered from the old regulations, is to get an approval under the Medical Assessment and Rating Board, and so on. And the power to make regulations has been given to the National Medical Commission under Section 57 of the Act. This includes regulations for the form of the scheme, the particulars thereof, the fee to be accompanied, and the manner of submitting schemes for establishing a new medical college, for starting any postgraduate course, or for increasing the number of seats. Now, there are the rules under this provision. So the minimum requirement for annual MBBS exam regulations 2020 was established, which state any legally established hospital can be a teaching hospital if it has the required amount of patient load and provides teaching spaces. Most importantly, the regulator has chosen not to prescribe the minimum amount of land required, which is often a very silly benchmark, as it should depend upon the municipal norms. This move would encourage student-faculty interaction, small group teaching, and bedside classes, while bringing down the cost of establishing a medical college substantially down. Since 2014, 147 new colleges have been approved, out of which 63 are functional, which is less than 50%. However, intakes of students continues to remain on a lower side. While the number of undergraduate medical seats in China are nearly 3.5 times those in India, the former has fewer medical colleges, 420 in 2018 as against as against India's 476 in 2018. Now, government colleges will have relatively affordable fees but have limited seats, whereas private medical colleges would prefer to remain small in number of intakes due to the following reasons. A, the increasing scale of 50, 100, 150, 200, and 250 needs an increase in other facilities like hospital beds, examination halls, equipment, etc. The private colleges generally do not have funds to do said exemption. The regulation for each category of slabs of medical students seem over-prescriptive, as they highlight only the number of books in the library, but the number of exam halls, equipment, amongst others. As per a 2021 economic survey, India tends to favor prescriptive regulation over supervision to reduce accountability on the regulators. However, this is an approach that leads to over-regulation, which is a big disease across the spectrum of our regulatory regime. We tend to over-regulate. Second, the medical college groups that have such funds prefer setting up another smaller college, as the fees for 50% seats are capped as per the NMC guidelines, as I spoke. There are not only so many people in the other 50% that can cross-subsidize the rest. Even 10% vacant seats can significantly dent in profits, which lead to colleges preferring to stay small. Now, what are the solutions that we can think of, or the sort of way forward? One is to have a blend of digital and physical education. A new word is phygital education, which is already happening. We have experienced the kind of online education as well as hybrid or offline, a combination of all the three, which has been happening. Secondly, the fee rationalization. How do we encourage public-private partnership models? As I said, one of the leading causes for students to choose education abroad is the high fees, high cost in Indian medical colleges. India's private players have medical colleges that charge over 1.25 crores for a 5.5-year course. That's a huge amount. In a recent step by the Rajasthan government in this direction, a committee under the chairmanship of a High Court judge was set up to decide upon the fees of medical courses in the state after going through the fee structure of other states. A draft of the Rajasthan Private Education Fixation of Fee Bill was released by the government and will be brought in the assembly soon. Now, India conducts the NEET exam for its yearly undergraduate and postgraduate intake, the National Eligibility cum Entrance Test. The cost-effective education abroad is a key factor for students to move abroad. Another one is difficulty in clearing the entrance exam, as I said earlier. And leaving aside NEET, PG, the entrance test for NEET UG undergraduate is one of the hardest in the world. In popular culture, several digital educators have tried to solve the NEET UG exam papers, some of them with masters and doctorates in their respective science field. All of them have said unequivocally that a school graduate to solve this exam would require a high-level understanding of the science streams which one would gather in their first or second year of undergraduate school. Now, even the Supreme Court has commented on the NEET that this is the sole criteria for entering into medical education in India. Now, if you look at the exam formulated by the Central Board of Secondary Education, it is disadvantageous to rural and economically backward state board students. There is a discrimination, inherent discrimination. Now, for the undergraduate entrance exam, the focus on holistic and skill-based curriculum in schools should be increased. The Government of India had proposed a national exit test next from graduates from any jurisdiction, including India, will have to clear to gain a license to practice in India. The first test to be conducted in 2023 and in later years will serve as the test of merit for admission in postgraduate courses while acting as a screening test in place of the foreign medical graduates exam. The foreign medical graduates exam is something which all of them have to clear when they come from an MBBS degree from abroad. The idea of license to practice for all medical graduates is a robust and fair way to ensure threshold quality. Now, the emphasis on preventative healthcare and use of Ayush doctors is another very critical way. The national education policy has acknowledged the pluralist choices of healthcare exercised by Indians. The Indian healthcare system needs to address the health problems of both worlds, that is malnutrition, infectious diseases of the developing world, and obesity, diabetes, etc. of the developed world. To effectively address these across the rural and urban population, an efficient integrated system that essentially has knowledge of modern medicine as well as Ayush system is necessary. This will eventually result in a single medical course at the undergraduate level, bringing about the notion of one nation, one healthcare system. Something which needs to be revived is recognition of RMPs for rural and semi-urban areas. An unqualified healthcare practitioner without any formal registration practicing allopathic medicine can be called a rural medical practitioner. Widely identified as such, the RMP in India enjoys much standing among rural residents and people living in urban slums. It is now well accepted that the state is unable to bring quality health care within the people, especially those living in rural areas. Attempts have been made by governments to give some training to these RMPs and certify them. The Government of India advocated their involvement in the implementation of the national health and family welfare programs in the country. Some pilot studies have shown that RMPs are interested in getting involved in the national health and family welfare programs. It is also advocated that they can be involved in the delivery of maternal and child health as well as in family planning services. The reason behind rural acceptance of RMPs is easy accessibility, familiarity with the villages, availability around the clock, and affordable services. There is a need to mainstream the old RMP scheme. This used to exist in India in the past, to do a 3-year course and be able to work in the system to provide healthcare. This can also create jobs, which is another very major problem in India, especially to those people who are living in rural areas. This can be something which they can undertake and be able to provide reasonable medical care locally. Now, there is a lobby which is working against this. Even when it was proposed that Ayush doctors could also be trained to deliver allopathy, the medical doctors rose up in arms. And that is something which we need to look at as to how do we overcome this kind of tough issue if in case it is run. Now, most of the educated doctors who are posted in the rural areas don't even want to go to rural areas. They often get a deputation to the urban area and stay there. And therefore, it is important that we look at it as to how can we improve the availability of medical education, medical personnel, particularly at the level of doctors or healers, rather than to be dependent only upon the allopathic systems. Let me conclude with the point on the infrastructure status to healthcare. There is a demand and supply gap in the healthcare sector, and yet the healthcare projects are not seen as attractive investments. Recently, the proposed data centers were given infrastructure status, which will provide access to foreign investment and private capital and help them to borrow funds at lower cost and thus enable rapid deployment of data centers across the country. Similarly, the health sector, especially medical institutions, deserves similar benefits. In essence, the entire healthcare industry deserves the status, and more investment should be directed towards this industry to create systems and structures which can bring healthcare and health education to the community in an accessible and an affordable manner. In order to rebuild and energize the healthcare sector after the pandemic, it is essential that we develop our country's capacity in medical education and improve affordability and accessibility. In this regard, we also need to study whether the recent reforms in the medical education regulations are giving the desired results, or do we need more reforms. With that, let me conclude recalling my own association with Bombay Chambers of the past I've often appeared on the platform, and particularly at the time when late Dr. Atinder Sen used to be the Director General. I still value the tie, the beautiful tie that the Bombay Chamber has produced, as something which what was gifted to me by my late friend Atinder Sen. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for really fabulous thoughts. And I would like to request Indranil Pan, co-chair Economic Policy Research Committee, and Narang, member Economic Policy Committee of Bombay Chamber, to join the panel so that we can get more clarity on the new education policy 2020, where really the opportunities are and where the challenges we Indian citizens we are going to face. So request Indranil and Shamesh to join the panel, please.
Thank you, Shri. Thank you.
Hi, Shamesh. Indranil, are you there? Indranil, you are on mute. Shamir, can you start, please? Because I think Indranil is on mute.
Right. So, first of all, thank you so much, both Professor Sivakumar as well as Pradeep Mehta for a wonderful insight into the new education policy. So, to begin with, I thought, just to also get an overarching view from both of you. The first thing I had in my mind was that it's not very often that India produces a newer education policy. The first one came in 1968. Then we had under Indira Gandhi. Then 1986 under Rajiv Gandhi. And now in 2020. So it's after a very long gap that we've had a new education policy coming in. And I think the only change perhaps was in 2009 under the Common Minimum Program, that they used to ensure there is education for all. But I think that has always been the overarching emphasis of the education empowerment in India. It was under the Right to Education Bill. And also the earlier education policies spoke, both the 1968 and 86 spoke of that the education spend as a percent of GDP should be at 6% of GDP. We are running at half of that, around about 3% of GDP, between 3 and 3.5. So I think overall, from an overarching macro standpoint, I think this policy speaks more about quality rather than quantity alone. So what's your take on that in a nutshell? If we look at, these policy interventions happen not on periodic basis, but in decades, number one. So how do you see this as that big an event as it is in terms of decadal changes that it happens? And the emphasis is on quality rather than quantity. So what's your take on it, Professor Sivakumar? And then we'll probably go to, Pradeep Mehta. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Samir. You have aptly put the infrequent changes that were attempted in Indian context, though did not culminate in the desirable outcomes as were envisaged even in these infrequent policy initiatives at the aggregate level, at the macro level. Yes, you did mention about 6% being the eventual target of the allocation of the resources, 6% of the GDP, the resources to the education sector, and we have been somewhere around 2.8 to 3.1% at best. I think that's the highest. Now, when we look at some of the countries like Netherlands, UK, United States, a few other countries, it's already 6%, 5.5% of their bigger budgets and lesser population they are blessed with. Reasons, as I just mentioned earlier, there is some kind of mindset, I would say, among the people who run the institutions. They are constrained with the budgetary resources and mindset related issues. When it comes to the question of budgets, this is one service where probably the only service, if I'm not wrong, where much before you start delivering anything, 100% of your total expected revenue for the next financial or academic year, whatever, it's academic year, you would receive much before the service is delivered, even an iota of that. I don't think there is any other service which is pre-booked perpetually over generations. If at all certain scarcity related things like Bajaj Auto in the 70s or 80s, I remember, we had to book that, provide the entire amount, some 6,000-7,000 rupees in those days, and wait for about 8 to 10 years. If you are lucky, you will get the allotment. But that was only during the scarcity periods, but not all through. So this is one field where the students are so anxious to reserve their seat by committing to make the 100% payment to the institutions. Now, why there is again some qualitative issues so far is again live and let live mindset. Let us remain in peace. Let us also not trouble the students too much. We have certain notes or diaries prepared. So let's make fuller utilization of the efforts put in about a decade back. Let's run it into at least 1 decade or more, particularly in the school education. So there may be umpteen number of other changes that may have happened even in the school education with good amount of innovations happening, but not many are having that right mindset of putting some pressure on themselves to upgrade both in terms of quality. Even though there is some kind of a sponsoring budget for training the teachers, they are reluctant to go and get trained, even within the district. They don't want to go for these training programs. So even if it helps with some moderate increments, still they are reluctant.
Right.
So
right. Understood.
This is a mindset issue basically. So Understood. That has to start in the minds of the school college administrators first, then among the teachers, and then we can expect this to percolate into the learners. That's the sequence, I think. Yeah.
Understood. Perfect. Indranil, you're on mute. Would you take the, you want to ask the next question, please?
Yeah, Mr. Mehta, you did talk quite significantly on the medical education. From your experience, do you see a similar issue happening in terms of engineering education also, and in terms of certain other very specified skills that we would probably need for the immediate future? If you can throw some light on that, that would be helpful maybe for the group.
In the sector of engineering education, what I've seen is an oversupply of institutions and the management area as well, both of them. And many of them have shut down because there are no longer students going forward for these kind of things. And it is the same problem, Indranil. What I said earlier was, the availability of faculty. Faculty was a big problem, and secondly, most of the pass outs were certainly below, I mean, they were below an average level as well. I've interviewed many of them and who come and work with me, etc., etc. And I found them, I would not have passed them. To give you an example, one person who had done a post-graduation on with heat engines as his thesis subject. And when I asked him, I said, look, can you tell me what are the fundamental laws of heat exchange? He was sort of nonplussed. He just could not answer. I said, look, you don't know the fundamental laws of heat. Heat loss is equal to heat gain. Very simple. You don't need to know rocket science to know this very basic point. So Point is that, okay, he had done a thesis on heat engines, but he forgot the basic principles of heat exchange as to what, giving an example of. So we do have a very wide amount of anomalies in our system, whether it's adequate. I mean, some of them were spoken at length by Professor Sivakumar, very granular issues which he had raised, which apply to any sector of education, higher education. Primary education, again, S.N.V report points out again and again the kind of how pathetic it is that, students don't even know what 2 plus 2 means. So, and the S.N.V report, which comes out by Pratham in Bombay, is something really worth seeing. So we have a very huge problem in our education system, and it is only the good news among all this higher education is the law universities. They're doing a fantastic job. It's completely a new arrival in the last 10 years or 20 years. Kicked off at the National Law University School, National Law School University of Bangalore. And that is again another sector that we interact with on a regular basis. We have partnership with NLUD, with the NLUSI in Bhopal, and so on and so forth. That sector is improving and running very fast. And something what we must understand is that let us look at how the law university system has evolved in India. And don't forget that usually people approaching law were the sort of, reminds me of the last resort of the scoundrels. When they failed in, getting into engineering or anything else, any other professional course to do, but no longer. That is no longer the phenomenon. The phenomenon has changed. Now there are people who are seriously interested in law to pursue as either as a litigator or as a researcher is phenomenal. And there's a huge change that I see. I mean, that is the kind of thing that we require to see in any of the professional areas, whether it's medical or engineering, etc. Engineering, of course, we had this huge success in the IITs, but then, how many students can get into IITs or NITs? Again, it's a big problem. IIMs, again, a huge problem for any average student to get into these institutions. And therefore, we had this second layer of subaltern institutions, as it were, in the area of management and engineering, which cropped up, around the countryside, and many of them promoted by rich politicians as money-making enterprises. But what did they produce? They produced very terrible, outcomes. And unfortunately, whether it is medical or education or institutions like IITs, etc., is that many of them, we train them and they leave the country for better, greener pastures elsewhere. So, well, some of them do come back. There's been a brain gain as well. Ever since these salary structures have improved. But it's, as I said, it's complex. There are too many dimensions that we need to look at more seriously. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I know, Mr. Mehta, you'll have to probably leave at 5:15. But before you leave, a very generic question to both of you, Professor Sivakumar and you. There's something that is slightly perplexing to me, both from the the build-up of the student in his education process and then as he enters the higher education structure. And the specific point that I want to mention is in the national education policy. The mother tongue as a medium of instruction has been highlighted in a very significant way. Not only till the 5th, I know West Bengal government had a medium of exchange as Bengali, of education as Bengali till the 5th, but this national education policy wants to take it at least up to the 8th standard wherever it is possible. Now, my confusion is, most of the textbooks that we still see today, especially from, say, a medical perspective, a law perspective, in an engineering perspective, all are written in English. I have also done a little bit of imparting education to students, but not in a very formal sense. And especially in West Bengal, where I saw these people who have been mostly trained in vernacular, but there's bright students, and when they come to the bachelor's segment, and they find all textbooks are in English, they are actually at a C loss and they don't perform well. So where is the bliss point, so to say? I know of other research, especially from even the World Bank and the UN, which talks about the fact that when the medium of education is your mother tongue, then imparting education possibly becomes easier. Yes, it does. Even when I teach to my, say, a 5-year or a 6-year-old, I talk to her or talk to him in my mother tongue, and that is possibly the best medium of communication. That's the dichotomy that I have. I don't know how you would be able to sort of help me in this. The second thing is in more or less a similar line. If you are looking for, say, a city like Bombay, where you have people coming from all over India and settling down and their children are going to school, if you really expect that that person will, and the medium becomes Marathi, I think it's very difficult in terms of adjusting the whole system once over again. In more cosmopolitan cities like, say, Mumbai, there can be some other examples also. So these are the two sort of segments that I want to sort of bring to the table, and would want to listen to both of you.
Mehta Saab, I think I request you to first respond, or
no, go.
can I take that question?
I'll be happy to. Let me happy to respond, because I just about a couple of minutes before I have to leave.
Sure.
There is in our country, the whole governance system. Often there is a mismatch between needs and availability. I will give you an example of CNG being used for our vehicles, and everywhere you see long lines even today. Why could they not think of doing it? And the same thing we are going to see with electric vehicles as well. You will not have the availability of the infrastructure for delivering the fuel or power, and you will have a lot of vehicles coming up into this kind of thing. So the same thing applies there. Undoubtedly, teaching young up to 5th standard at least, I would support in vernacular is important. But do we have availability of the textbooks? That again, we find this kind of mismatch which is happening. So I can't understand as to who's deciding all these things without understanding what the problem is. The CNG problem still remains today, that you go to a petrol pump and you suddenly find long lines of vehicles waiting for CNG supply. Why couldn't they think of having an adequate number of availability of filling stations for CNG instead of creating a huge demand with a very low supply factor? So this is, as I said, it's a universal problem in our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mehta. Professor Sivakumar?
And if I may take your leave,
yeah, sure.
Thank you very much. It was a very interesting session. As I said, I'll send my paper to Sugita. She can circulate.
Yes, sure. Please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
For your
Namaskar. Namaskar.
Yes, Mr. Indranil, part one of your question, the suitability of taking up the professional education for those who come with mother tongue, having studied their schooling as well as up to +2. Yes, it is a serious issue. In fact, I totally empathize with those. I have studied my schooling and +2 in Telugu. That's my mother tongue. Now, when I took up the higher education, then in the graduation, I felt out of place. Others were doing reasonably well in the first few months at least, but I ended up becoming the university topper. Of all the 3 years, I stood number 1. Now, probably that may not be the case with some technical education. Mine was arts. So I could have done it with some efforts, but yes, I do agree with you on that. The change has to be initiated from ab initio, from the schooling. If the the existing syllabi, if they are revised so that all the technical terms they are appropriately translated without using the same English words, then the students would understand and imbibe things better, and they would perform well. I'm reminded of the ex-ISRO chairman, Dr. K. Sivan, who was a farmer's son, and he used to work in agricultural lands, and he used to fill literally soil in the tractors. And he never knew what to study and where to go. So some gentleman he guided, and he said that you can try for IISc. He says, where is IISc? He was not even aware whether it is in Karnataka or somewhere else. So this person tried, and he wrote the entrance exam, and he scored all 100%. And there's no looking back. And he comes for his schooling as well as +2 from regional language. Yes, the second part, in a cosmopolitan city like Mumbai, or could be even Calcutta, for example, or for us Delhi, if we go to these places, why the students are forced to study the regional language? Why not allow them to pursue language of their choice? Unfortunately, mother tongue, the schools may not be having enough resources to continue recruiting and providing on a regular basis the salaries for the teachers. We have certain recognized languages in India. So all mother tongues in all the metropolitan cities, probably financially there could be certain issues. That's my quick response to that. Yes, it should not be made mandatory. In fact, while we look the global languages spoken, Hindi, Bengali, they happen to have world rankings in terms of number of people who speak these languages. So as a next alternative, people can be given some choices, if not mother tongue.
Okay, I get your point.
And maybe spared from the, mandatory learning of the state language, that is the regional language.
Mr. Mehta has left. He actually raised this very important sort of topic of the Acer Pratham study, and how sort of the education outcomes have been quite different or substandard compared to what we want to achieve. For example, just for the sake of the audience, there's one just sort of statistics that comes across very significantly. Only 44% of the students in the government schools could actually read a standard 2 level text. And similar is the case of mathematics. Even a class 5 student sometimes have been found not to be able to solve a class 2 or a class 3 mathematics. Does this new education policy address enough in terms of trying to bridge down this huge amount of input versus output gap that is there in the education system? I know for certain that the Niti Aayog was working on this project, and they actually were through an index-based system, they were planning to rank the various states in terms of who is better in terms of outcomes rather than the others, and what could be the corrective steps that are taken. First of all, anyways, does this education policy take adequate cognizance of the fact? And if you can throw some light, even from the perspective of the Niti Aayog study, in terms of where it is in terms of its implementation. And the other thing, obviously, Mr. Mehta made a point, it's the faculty. Does this education policy talk about retraining of the existing teachers to bring them in tune to the new education policy? Over to you, Professor.
In the public education system, some schools such as the Kendriya Vidyalaya or some Sainik schools, the standards are rigorous. All and sundry cannot make it. As a teacher, the selection process is pretty tough. Same is the case with some of the government schools where Ministry of Home Affairs for Union Territories, they conduct the interview process through UPSC. So I happen to be one of the few lucky persons who got selected. It's very tough, so to say, and they publish your name, not roll number, in the newspapers. Okay. So now coming back from the few public schools or colleges or IITs, IIMs, these are very niche kind of tertiary education segments. Barring these few, the reality across the 28 states in India today is that the teachers, unfortunately, they come to the teaching because there is no other go, or a school is very close by, it's the walking distance. So let me go there, spend a few hours and earn limited resources. And there's no motivation, so to say. From the recruiter's point of view, the so-called private teachers, as was mentioned rightly by Mr. Mehta a little while ago, while he was talking, these are institutions, particularly the professional institutions, not schooling so much, which are started by some wealthy persons in the society. So their job is not to have some highly qualified B.Ed or M.Ed trained teachers, but somebody who can manage the show, so to say. Honestly, I am not quite hopeful that in the next 3 to 5 years, some sweeping changes could be seen across the country. I'm not optimistic, but at the same time, because education is becoming more and more costlier, and the students are well informed through the various electronic media, social media, they are well connected. They know what's happening in which part of the state or in the country. So the demand side changes, so to say. The expectations will compel the teachers to change all that they have done over the past roughly 3-4 decades now. They can't any longer afford to continue that into future. So my thinking is that over the next say some 10 to 15 year time horizon from today, there will be some dramatic change. But let us be pragmatic in our expectations that the next 3 to 5 years, I don't see pan-India some fundamental changes happening only because of this. And one of the participants, they just asked me a question to which I have replied saying, it is a new education policy, it's not an act. This is passed by the Union Cabinet of India. This is not taken to Parliament, and it is not ratified by India's Parliament. Second point is that this being state subject, particularly the school education, all the states or majority of the states, they must make some appropriate changes. Maharashtra state, for example, has constituted some task force. That task force has submitted its report to the present government, and it is available on the web, public domain, it's there. So they have provided some kind of a roadmap how these changes are to be affected in Maharashtra state. It's available. I would suggest some of you who may be interested to kindly download and see some highlights of the task force report on NEP for the state of Maharashtra. So likewise, the state has to, this is only a task force report. Again, they would study that, they would put a bill, and that would be taken up for discussion, which may not be of any great interest to, with due respect, to the members in the assembly. For them, this is not a priority. So they have to accept that if it is put to voting. Only after that it becomes some kind of a hopeful and implementable act within the state. Till such time it is only a prescription, a code. You are suggested to follow this kind of, but it's not legally binding on anyone. But ICSE and CBSE, the funds may be in future, either in the second term of this government or the subsequent government. If they continue with this NEP 2020, they may be linked to implementation of this NEP. The fund allocation may be tied to this. So automatically changes can be expected in all those schools which have the certification from CBSE and ICSE board, no matter whether they may be in the public ownership or in the private ownership.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
But Professor Sivakumar, sorry, I just had a point here that in just, as what you are saying in terms of changes, the NEP also speaks about doing away, I mean, the boards will not be that important, they will continue. But the entire, system moves towards the US SATs in terms of that exam, which will make you eligible for colleges. So, I mean, what's your take on that? I mean, how structurally important that is? I think you already have it in certain management, schools or for medical, but they are piecemeal. Now we are looking at a structurally very different scenario for any college. For instance, when I went to SRCC, the cutoff was 88 or 89. Now I think they're in late 90s. So now so the boards may not be that important.
Again, there is hardly any clarity. I'm not in a position to comment anything on that because, even we are wondering, we have certain leading private or public business schools, for example. If somebody does his first year in IIM Ahmedabad, the Makkah of India's management education, suppose he would like to go to some other B school, he is always welcome. Likewise, if some less known third rung or fourth rung institution, if he gets admission, would he be admitted in IIM Ahmedabad or IIM ABC or L or any of the IIMs or MDI? I have my serious doubts. Universities, for example, if this is a little bit extended, if somebody takes his international admission in Oxford in the first year, he can walk into second year or third year in any of the universities internationally. Same would be the case with Harvard. But is the other way around true? If somebody gets admission in Bangladesh-based, less known engineering or medical college, would he be admitted into Imperial College, London? So in terms of parity, this is more wishful thinking on the part of the government of India. Also, certainty of revenues. Presently, you have some kind of a certainty. So to say, there is some batch of a standard size of 60. That is what AICTE batch size is. So you have a permission of, let's say, some 10 divisions. So 600 students multiplied with some X rupees. Your revenue is certain in today's context. If you are a reasonably recognized institution in India, your revenue is certain. Now, going forward, if this moves with full throttle, let us say this NEP, okay, you are unsure whether you will be admitting 600 students in the second year. First year, it's okay. You may admit all the 600 students. In the second year, would you have the same 600 students or 250 students leaving from here and only 30 students joining your institution? How would you manage your show with uncertainty of revenue? Can you hire on a permanent basis the same faculty, giving them a few tens of lakhs of rupees a year? These are some matters which we need to seriously, think before we expect some kind of pan-India implementation of this NEP. On ground, these are some of the matters on which government can't, because these are self-financed institutions. The government is not giving a penny.
Understood. Understood. Indranil, over to you.
No, so I don't think I have much more to comment on the sort of discussion. There is one question that has come up from Dr. Keshav Nandi on the chat box. I'll just read it out. Please tell how there can be a dynamic syllabus in different streams under new education policy. If not done, students will try to solve today's problem with yesterday's solution and will fail?
Yeah, I recall, I have not seen that. I have responded to one of the same participant, Dr. Keshav Nandi, but this particular question I have not seen. I am reminded of former finance minister, economist, Mahbubul Haq, Dr. Mahbubul Haq. In UNDP, 9th annual report on human development report published by the UNDP, Mahbubul Haq, along with Amartya Sen, in that 9-minute clipping, he mentioned the same thing. We are fighting battles of tomorrow with weapons of yesterday. This is what exactly is late Mahbubul Haq's statement. That's true. Dynamic changes are possible only in about, as things stand today, in about a single digit to at best 10% of the institutions across all the various domains of education, right from schooling to the university education. Reasons are pretty simple. There is a laid down mechanism. Still, there is a control of University Grants Commission, Medical Council of India, All India Council for Technical Education, and so on. Now, they sit somewhere in one part of India. They wouldn't know the ground realities in schools, in colleges, in universities. They simply prescribe certain ratios, certain standards, and they say that these standards must be implemented. Whenever we come for any accreditation, like NAC, NBA, or any other accreditation, they say, do you have these things? So there are some marks for this. If you comply, the maximum gettable marks is this much. So if you score minimum of this, you would qualify for some star rating. So that is how they go. Now, dynamic changes are possible if and only if the faculty members are charged. They take this as a passion and not simply as a job. Many things are possible. There are people who have produced more than 100 PhD scholars, and all of them are doing very good. And in one's lifetime, it's impossible for any ordinary persons like us to imagine producing of 100 PhD scholars. Each PhD scholar, you would need to invest about 4 to 5 years of your time, your quality time, which has a high opportunity cost of 18 to 20 lakh rupees, which you would forego financially. If you are engaged in some kind of lecturing, to produce one PhD, you would have otherwise earned about 20 lakh rupees. So that's a internal drive. Many of the renowned guides, they have produced in sciences, in some other fields, wonderful research work they have done. But can we expect all these in the school education for the teachers who get paid very small amounts, which are sufficient only hand-to-mouth kind of living? Yeah. I don't think we are producing that kind of internal zeal or urge among the providers.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Sivakumar. And unless Samir has any further comments to make, I think I'll open this to question answers. Shugita, I hope participants would be able to unmute and ask a question if there are any.
Indranil, actually, they should post in the question answer chat box only. They are not allowed to unmute. And
so we will wait for about a minute or so. I don't see any further questions in the chat box. So let us wait for a minute or so, and then we can possibly call an end to this extremely good discussion that we had today. Samir, you have anything to add?
No, I think it went very well. There's a question that has come. So,
Samir, would you do me a favor by reading the question out, please?
Just hold on. Let me just see. Shugita, you can read it.
Yeah, so, okay, I am able to see it. I'll read it.
Yeah.
Only one query. This is from Nitin S. Dharmawat. Only one query. Since NEP has come, the next logical step is to bring in the NCF, which is the National Curriculum Framework. There is a committee formed under the leadership of Dr. Kasturi Rangan, former chairman of the ISRO. What do you think by when the NCF can come into existence? Will it be from the upcoming session of 22-23 or the next year 23-24? Professor Sivakumar?
My hope is that it might come from 23-24 because we have had academic year derailed because of the COVID restrictions. The year 2020, which was the ending year of 2019-2020, the last 2 months suddenly did not go as planned. So 21-22 and 22-23, these 2 years also will be a bit different from the regular academic years that we have been having in the past, that is pre-2020. So my thinking is that in the coming academic year 22-23, it is very difficult. Probably the following year may be feasible.
Okay, thank you, Professor Sivakumar.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nitin, for that.
I don't think, Shogita, there are any further questions.
We can. It's extremely useful discussion, no doubt. And I'm indeed privileged to perform the pleasant task of proposing the vote of thanks today. On behalf of the Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry and on my own behalf, I extend sincere thanks to Shri Pradeep Mehta, Professor Sivakumar, Indranil and Narang for sharing the valuable insights on the topic of New Education Policy 2020 Opportunities and Challenges. We have discussed today that in addition to the issues and challenges with respect to expenditure on education, gross enrollment pattern, gross enrollment ratio, capacity utilization, infrastructure facilities, student-teacher ratio, there are 3 major areas to be focused to ensure that our education system is sustainable and meets global standard. Number 1, quality of education. Number 2, affordability of education. And number 3, ethics in education. We agreed that the knowledge, skills, and productivity of our young workforce forms the backbone of our economy. And to attain the benefits of such a young workforce, we need to implement the reforms in the education system. Thank you very much once again for your insightful address to our members. Our partner, SPA Capital Services Limited and Aditya Birla Capital deserve special thanks to for supporting us to materialize today's webinar on this particular subject, which is both topical and important. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Director General Bombay Chamber, Sandeep Khosla, for theme setting and delivering the welcome address today. I would also like to thank my colleague Aishwarya Khaskiwala, Priyanka Agarwal, Executive Bombay Chamber, and Vikram Negi, IT Faculty Bombay Chamber, for their commitment and absolutely jealous non-stop work. Before I conclude my address and today's session, I thank all our participants for joining us today. I thank you all once again. Thank you.
Thank you.